Erin Cole stood in front of a room full of decorated officers, her voice barely audible over the hum of the projector, warning them about something they couldn't see, couldn't touch, something most of them didn't believe existed. A microfront, she called it. 17 minutes, she said. Delay the convoy by 17 minutes or risk everything. The general laughed, actually laughed, and waved her off like she was suggesting they consult a crystal ball. But when the live feed flickered to life moments later, showing the exact stretch of road where that convoy would have been, now nothing but smoke and twisted metal and fire, nobody was laughing anymore. The general just stared at the screen, his coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips. And Erin, calm as ever, updated her forecast without missing a beat. Told you it would rain lead, sir. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Erin Cole had always been the kind of person who noticed things other people missed. As a child growing up in rural Montana, she would spend hours watching cloud formations shift across the big sky, tracing their movements with her finger, whispering their names like prayers. Cirrus, Cumulus, Nimbostratus. Her father, a rancher who lost half his herd to an unexpected blizzard when Erin was 9, used to joke that she could smell rain 3 counties away. It wasn't a joke to Erin. She could feel pressure changes in her bones, sense the microscopic shifts in humidity that preceded storms, read the atmosphere like other kids read comic books. By the time she was 16, she was helping local farmers plan their planting schedules, and by 20, she had a scholarship to study atmospheric sciences at Colorado State. Her professors called her intuitive. Her classmates called her weird. Both were right. The military had recruited her straight out of graduate school. They didn't want her because she was the best at reading computer models or analyzing satellite data, though she was excellent at both. They wanted her because she had something that couldn't be taught, a sixth sense for weather patterns that defied conventional forecasting. In her first year with the Army, she had predicted a sandstorm in Iraq that every model said wouldn't happen for another 6 hours. It hit in 40 minutes, exactly when she said it would. And the base commander who had ignored her warning spent the next week digging equipment out of dunes. After that, some people started listening. Most still didn't. Major General Robert Hayes was not a man who put much stock in feelings or hunches or anything that couldn't be measured and quantified. He was a strategist, a logistics expert, someone who believed in numbers and protocols and the kind of rigid planning that had served him well for 32 years in uniform. He had fought in 3 wars, commanded thousands of troops, navigated political minefields in the Pentagon, and he hadn't gotten where he was by trusting gut instincts, especially not the gut instincts of a 28-year-old meteorology officer who looked like she should be teaching middle school science class. When Erin first joined his command 6 months ago at Forward Operating Base Sentinel, in a country whose name was classified in official reports but everyone knew anyway, Hayes had been polite but dismissive. Weather was important, sure, but it was background information, not mission-critical intelligence. You checked the forecast, you planned accordingly, you moved on. It wasn't complicated. The briefing room at FOB Sentinel was a converted storage facility. Concrete walls painted institutional beige, fluorescent lights humming overhead. A large digital screen dominating one wall. 23 officers and senior enlisted personnel sat in metal folding chairs arranged in neat rows, their attention focused on Major Caldwell, the operations officer, who was walking them through the details of Operation Copperwire. It was a standard supply run, or as standard as anything could be in a combat zone. A convoy of 8 vehicles would travel 42 miles from FOB Sentinel to Forward Operating Base Dakota, delivering ammunition, medical supplies, and replacement parts for communications equipment. The route had been used dozens of times before. Intelligence indicated low enemy activity in the area. Air support would be on standby. Weather forecast showed clear skies, mild temperatures, light winds from the northwest. Expected departure time was 0700 hours. Expected arrival time was 0915 hours. Erin sat in the back row, her laptop balanced on her knees, studying a data stream that didn't match what Major Caldwell had just described. Clear skies, he had said. Light winds. Her screen showed something different. Not dramatically different, but enough to make her stomach tighten. There was a pressure anomaly developing about 30 miles northwest of the convoy route. a tiny fluctuation that the standard weather models were completely ignoring. It wouldn't show up on satellite imagery for another hour, maybe longer. But Erin could see its signature in the raw atmospheric data, the way a detective might spot a clue in a crime scene photo that everyone else walked right past. She had seen this pattern before, not here, but in her research, in historical data, from desert regions where hot air masses collided with cooler layers in just the right way to create what meteorologists called microfront instability. It didn't produce rain or snow or anything visible to the naked eye. It produced something else. She raised her hand. Major Caldwell paused mid-sentence, looking mildly annoyed at the interruption. The general, seated in the front row with his arms crossed, didn't turn around. Everyone else shifted in their seats with the universal body language of people who wanted to get through a meeting and move on with their day. Erin stood up, her voice steady despite the dozen pairs of eyes now focused on her. "Excuse me, sir, but I need to flag a potential issue with the timeline. There is a microfront developing along the northwestern corridor that could impact visibility and create unpredictable wind patterns in the target area. I recommend delaying the convoy departure by 17 minutes to allow the system to pass through." The room went very quiet. Then someone in the third row, a captain whose name Erin could never remember, let out a barely suppressed laugh. Major Caldwell's expression remained neutral, but his tone carried a note of condescension that made Erin's jaw tighten. "Officer Cole, the forecast shows clear conditions all morning. Are you seeing something on your equipment that contradicts the official weather report?" "Not contradicts," Erin said carefully. "Supplements. The models we use for daily forecasts are excellent for general conditions, but they have a resolution limit. What I am tracking is happening on a smaller scale, microfront instability caused by thermal layering. It won't show up on standard satellite passes, but the atmospheric pressure data indicates it is there." General Hayes finally turned in his chair to look at her. His face was weathered and skeptical. The face of a man who had heard a lot of theories in his career and trusted very few of them. "Officer Cole," he said, his voice carrying the particular patience of someone addressing a child who had just suggested they drive to the moon. "We have used this route 17 times in the past 4 months without incident. We have air reconnaissance confirming clear conditions. We have intelligence indicating minimal enemy presence. And you are asking me to delay a critical supply convoy because of something you call a microfront that does not appear on any weather model. It won't appear until it is too late," Erin replied. "And by then, if the convoy is on the road, visibility could drop to near zero within minutes. I understand this sounds unusual, but the data supports it. 17 minutes, sir. That is all I'm asking for." Hayes stared at her for a long moment, then turned back to face the front. "Major Caldwell," he said, "what is your assessment?" Caldwell glanced at his own tablet, then back at the general. "Sir, I see no reason to alter our timeline based on a theoretical weather phenomenon that is not supported by our primary forecasting tools. Officer Cole is highly skilled, but in this case, I believe she is being overly cautious." The general nodded. "I agree. The convoy departs at 0700 as planned." He looked over his shoulder at Erin, his expression somewhere between amusement and irritation. "Officer Cole, I appreciate your diligence, but I need you to trust the established procedures we have in place. If we delayed every mission because someone had a hunch about the weather, we would never get anything done." There were a few chuckles around the room. Erin felt heat rise in her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from frustration. This wasn't a hunch. This was science, just science that operated on a scale most people weren't trained to recognize. But arguing further would accomplish nothing except making her look stubborn, or worse, hysterical. She sat back down, her laptop screen still showing the pressure anomaly that nobody else seemed to care about, and tried to ignore the sympathetic look from Lieutenant Marcus Chen, the signals officer, who sat 2 chairs away and who had been one of the few people to consistently take her forecasts seriously. The briefing continued. Erin stopped listening. She pulled up a different screen, a real-time atmospheric modeling program she had written herself during her graduate studies, and began running projections. If her calculations were correct, the microfront would reach peak intensity at approximately 0713 hours, right around the time the convoy would be passing through the area known as the Cawley Junction, a stretch of highway flanked by rocky hills on one side and open desert on the other. The visibility drop would be sudden and severe, Not because of sand or dust in the traditional sense, but because of the way the thermal layers would refract light and create a kind of atmospheric mirage effect that would make it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. It would last maybe 10 minutes, 15 at most, then dissipate as quickly as it formed. But 10 minutes was a long time when you were driving a convoy through hostile territory. She saved her data, closed her laptop, and waited for the briefing to end. At 06:45 hours, Erin was standing outside the motor pool, watching the convoy crews perform their final pre-departure checks. 8 vehicles, MR apps mostly, heavily armored and designed to withstand improvised explosive devices, lined up in formation. Soldiers moved efficiently, checking tire pressure, testing communications equipment, loading supplies, their movements practiced and routine. The sun was just beginning to crest the horizon, painting the desert in shades of orange and gold that would have been beautiful if Erin had been in the mood to appreciate beauty. She wasn't. She was watching the sky, tracking the almost imperceptible changes in the way the light bent through the air, feeling the slight pressure shift against her skin that told her she had been right. Lieutenant Chen appeared at her elbow, holding 2 cups of coffee that tasted like battery acid but contained enough caffeine to keep a person functional through the endless stretches of boredom punctuated by moments of terror that defined military life. He handed her one without comment. They stood in silence for a moment, sipping their terrible coffee and watching the convoy prepare to roll out. "You really think something is going to happen?" Chen asked finally. Erin nodded. "I know it is. I just don't know what." "That is a comforting thought," Chen said dryly. "Should I be worried?" "I have been wrong before," Erin admitted, "but not about this. Not about pressure systems." She glanced at him. "You could tell them to wait. You have the general's ear more than I do." Chen shook his head. "I burned my credibility vouching for your last forecast, the one about the sandstorm that never materialized." "It did materialize," Erin said, "just 20 miles south of where I said. I was off on the trajectory by 15 minutes and a few degrees. That is incredibly accurate for a spontaneous weather event." "Tell that to the general," Chen replied. "He heard sandstorm and prepared for base lockdown. When it missed us, he decided you were unreliable. Perception is reality in the military, Cole. You know that." She did know that. It was the most frustrating part of her job, the gap between what the data told her and what people were willing to believe. In civilian meteorology, being wrong meant someone might bring an umbrella they didn't need, or plan an outdoor wedding that got rained out. In military meteorology, being wrong could mean people died. But being right when everyone else said you were wrong didn't make you a hero. It just made you the person who cried wolf, and nobody wanted to listen to that person. The convoy engines roared to life, a deep rumbling growl that echoed off the base perimeter walls. Erin checked her watch. 06:58 hours, 2 minutes to departure. She pulled out her phone, opened her weather app, and watched the pressure readings tick downward in real time. It was starting, right on schedule, exactly the way she knew it would. At 0700 hours exactly, the convoy rolled out through the main gate, disappearing into the desert in a cloud of dust and diesel exhaust. Erin stood there long after they were gone, her coffee going cold in her hands, staring at the empty road and trying to shake the feeling that she had just watched something terrible begin. She went back to the weather station, a small air-conditioned container unit filled with computers and monitoring equipment that served as her office, her laboratory, and her sanctuary. She pulled up the live satellite feed, tracking the convoy's progress through GPS markers that updated every 30 seconds. They were making good time, moving at 45 miles per hour along the highway, maintaining proper spacing between vehicles, exactly according to protocol. Everything looked fine. Everything was fine, except for the atmospheric data that said it wasn't. At 0711 hours, Erin saw the pressure anomaly spike. It happened fast, faster than she had anticipated. The cold air mass dropping like a stone through the superheated layers above it, creating the exact conditions for severe refraction. She grabbed her radio, switched to the command frequency, and keyed the mic. "Command, this is Weather Station Alpha, requesting immediate contact with convoy copper wire, over." There was a burst of static, then Major Caldwell's irritated voice. "Weather Station Alpha, this is Command. Convoy is on schedule and reporting no issues. What is your emergency?" No emergency, Erin said, trying to keep her voice level. I am tracking the microfront I mentioned in the briefing. It is intensifying faster than projected. Convoy will hit peak conditions in approximately 2 minutes. I strongly recommend they reduce speed and increase vehicle spacing until it passes. Another pause. Then Caldwell again, his skepticism practically dripping through the speaker. Officer Cole, the convoy commander, reports clear skies and excellent visibility. Are you telling me your computer knows better than the eyes of trained soldiers? I am telling you that what they are seeing now is not what they will be seeing in 90 seconds. Erin shot back, her patience finally fraying. The refractive index is changing rapidly. They will not have warning. Sir, please, just ask them to slow down. She heard voices in the background, muffled and indistinct, then the general's voice, calm and authoritative and utterly unconvinced. Officer Cole, this is General Hayes. I appreciate your concern, but I am not going to disrupt a convoy operation based on a phenomenon that no one else can verify. If conditions change, the convoy commander will respond appropriately. Command out. The radio went dead. Erin stared at it, her hands shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the impotent rage of knowing she was right and being unable to make anyone listen. She switched frequencies, pulling up the convoy's internal communications channel, which she technically wasn't supposed to monitor, but had access to anyway because the comms officer owed her a favor. She heard the routine chatter of soldiers on a mission, calm and professional, nothing urgent. Then, at 0713 hours and 20 seconds, she heard the convoy commander's voice change. All vehicles, this is lead. Visibility dropping rapidly. Reduce speed to 20 miles per hour and tighten formation. Stay sharp. Erin leaned forward, her heart hammering against her ribs. Come on, she whispered to the screen, to the soldiers she couldn't see, to the universe that never seemed to care whether people listened to her warnings or not. Just get through it. Just get through. For 40 seconds, everything seemed okay. The convoy slowed, the vehicles maintained contact, nobody panicked. Then Erin heard something that made her blood turn to ice. It was faint, barely audible over the radio static, but unmistakable, the high-pitched whistle of incoming ordnance. Contact! Contact! The convoy commander's voice exploded through the speaker. RPGs inbound from the eastern ridge. All vehicles evade and return fire. The next 30 seconds were chaos. Shouting voices, the thunder of heavy weapons, the screech of tires and engines, and underneath it all, that horrible whistling sound that kept coming and coming. Erin could see it on her screen, the GPS markers suddenly breaking formation, scattering like startled birds, some moving erratically, some not moving at all. Her hands flew across her keyboard, pulling up every sensor she had, trying to understand what was happening, trying to do anything that might help. Then one of the GPS markers disappeared. No, Erin breathed. No, no, no. 2 more markers went offline. The radio frequency dissolved into a mess of overlapping transmissions, people screaming for medics, calling for air support, reporting casualties. Erin grabbed her main radio, switched back to the command frequency, and found it already lit up with activity. General Hayes was on the line, his calm demeanor completely gone, snapping orders to the operations center, demanding real-time updates, calling for close air support and medevac helicopters. She heard Major Caldwell coordinating the response, heard other officers scrambling to figure out what had gone wrong, how the enemy had known exactly where and when to strike. Erin sat back in her chair, her mind racing. The microfront hadn't caused the attack. It had just provided cover for it. The enemy had been waiting, dug into those hills, waiting for the convoy to enter the kill zone. Under normal conditions, the convoy would have seen them, might have spotted the ambush before it was sprung. But in the confusion of the sudden visibility drop, blinded by the atmospheric distortion Erin had warned them about, they had driven straight into it, and now people were dying because no one had believed her. She pulled up the satellite feed, enhanced the resolution as much as she could, and studied the terrain around College Junction. The ambush site was maybe 200 meters off the main highway, hidden in a cluster of rocky outcroppings that provided perfect cover. She could see heat signatures there, at least a dozen, possibly more, concentrated in a defensive position. The convoy had scattered to the south, trying to get out of the kill zone, but 3 vehicles were immobile, probably disabled. Erin's stomach twisted. She zoomed out, looking at the larger tactical picture, and saw something that made her breath catch. There was a secondary position. Another group of heat signatures, smaller, positioned about a mile to the southeast along a dirt track that intersected with an alternate route back to the base. They weren't engaging yet, they were waiting. If the convoy tried to retreat along the most obvious path, they would run straight into a second ambush. Erin grabbed her radio again. "Command, this is Weather Station Alpha. I have eyes on the satellite feed. There is a secondary enemy position approximately 1 mile southeast of the primary ambush site. If the convoy retreats along Route Tango 6, they will be engaged again." She heard a pause, then Caldwell's voice, tight with stress. "Weather Station, confirm you have tactical surveillance capability. That is not your assigned function." "I have access to the satellite network for atmospheric monitoring," Erin replied. "The sensors pick up thermal signatures. I am looking at them right now, sir. The secondary position has at least 8 to 10 combatants. They are waiting." Another pause. Then the general's voice, hard and focused. "Officer Cole, can you provide coordinates?" Erin rattled off the numbers from her screen. Her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. She added more information, everything she could see, the exact positioning of the enemy fighters, the likely fields of fire, the terrain features that could provide cover for the convoy if they knew where to look. She heard the general relaying the information to the Tactical Operations Center, heard other voices confirming air assets were inbound, heard the convoy commander acknowledging the new intelligence and redirecting his vehicles away from the trap. "Officer Cole," the general said, his tone still clipped, but different now, less dismissive. "Stay on this frequency and continue reporting anything you see. You are now part of the tactical team." "Copy that, sir," Erin said. For the next 20 minutes, she became the eyes in the sky for a desperate fighting retreat. She tracked enemy movements, spotted a group of fighters trying to flank the convoy from the north, and called it in before they could get into position. Identified a clear route through the hills that the convoy could use to break contact and make it back to the relative safety of the main highway. The close air support arrived, 2 Apache helicopters that engaged the primary ambush site with rockets and chain guns, while the convoy hauled their wounded into the surviving vehicles and punched through the enemy line. Erin watched it all on her screen, a clinical display of colored dots and thermal images that represented real people fighting and dying in the desert heat. And she kept her voice calm and professional and did her job. By 0800 hours, the convoy was clear of the ambush zone and racing back toward FOB Sentinel with 4 wounded soldiers and 1 critical. All 8 vehicles had survived, though 3 were badly damaged. The enemy fighters had dispersed, melting back into the landscape the way they always did, disappearing before the air support could do more than scatter them. It could have been so much worse. It should have been worse. If Erin hadn't spotted that secondary position, if the convoy had driven into that second ambush already battered and disorganized, they might have lost everyone. Erin sat in her weather station, surrounded by glowing screens and the quiet hum of cooling fans, and tried to stop her hands from shaking. She had done good work today. She knew that. She had saved lives. But all she could think about was how it never should have happened in the first place. How, if someone, anyone, had just listened to her 17-minute warning, those soldiers wouldn't have spent the last hour fighting for their lives. There was a knock on her door. She looked up to see General Hayes standing in the entrance, his uniform dusty and his face grim. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation and closed the door behind him. For a long moment, he just looked at her, and Erin had no idea what he was thinking. Then he spoke, his voice quiet. "You were right. About the microfront, about the timing. If we had delayed the convoy, they would have missed the ambush window entirely." "Yes, sir," Erin said, because there was nothing else to say. Hayes nodded slowly. "I owe you an apology, Officer Cole. I dismissed your warning, and because of that, 4 soldiers are in the hospital, and we came very close to losing a lot more. That is on me." Erin met his eyes. "With respect, sir, it is not about apologies. It is about trust. I gave you actionable intelligence based on solid data, and you ignored it because it did not fit your understanding of how weather works. That cannot happen again." The general's expression hardened slightly, but not with anger, with something that looked almost like respect. "You are right," he said. "It cannot. From now on, when you flag something, we listen. No arguments, no debates. You have my word." Thank you, sir, Erin said. She hesitated, then added, "The microfront cleared 17 minutes after it formed, exactly as projected. If the convoy had been delayed by that amount, they would have passed through Collie Junction with perfect visibility. They would have seen the ambush before it was sprung." "I know," Hayes said heavily. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "That thing you said during the briefing. Told you it would rain lead. Did you know this was going to happen?" Erin shook her head. "I knew there would be a visibility event. I knew it would create dangerous conditions. I did not know there was an ambush waiting. But weather does not exist in a vacuum, sir. It affects everything. Tactics, timing, decisions. That is why my job matters." Hayes nodded again, a small gesture of acknowledgement. "Noted, Officer Cole. Get some rest. We will debrief this properly tomorrow." He left. Erin sat alone in her weather station and pulled up her atmospheric models again, checking the forecast for the next 72 hours, looking for the next invisible threat that nobody else would see until it was too late. This was her life now. This was what she had signed up for. Watching the sky, reading the wind, knowing things that no one believed until the moment they desperately needed her to be right. She thought about her father back in Montana, watching his cattle scatter before a storm he never saw coming. She thought about the professors who called her intuitive, the classmates who called her weird, the general who had laughed at her 17-minute warning. She thought about 4 wounded soldiers and 1 critical, and about how many more there might have been if she hadn't been stubborn enough to keep watching her screens, keep tracking the data that only she seemed to understand. "Told you it would rain lead, sir," she whispered to the empty room. Then she got back to work. Word spread fast in a forward operating base. By dinner time, everyone knew some version of the story. The convoy that drove into an ambush, the meteorology officer who tried to warn them, the general who didn't listen, the coordinates that saved them. Erin found herself on the receiving end of looks she wasn't used to, respectful nods from soldiers who usually walked past her like she was furniture, actual conversations with officers who had previously treated her like a glorified weather app. Lieutenant Chen found her in the dining facility and sat down across from her with a grin that said, "I told you so," without having to speak the words. "You are officially the most interesting person on this base," he said, stabbing at something that might have been meatloaf, which is saying something, because we have a sergeant who can juggle knives and a chaplain who once boxed professionally. "I just did my job," Erin replied, keeping her eyes on her own plate. "You did everyone else's job too," Chen pointed out. "That thermal surveillance thing was brilliant. How long have you had satellite access?" "Since I got here," Erin admitted. "I needed it to track upper atmosphere wind patterns. The thermal imaging is just a side feature, but it is surprisingly detailed. And you never mentioned this to anyone?" "I mentioned it to Major Caldwell 3 months ago," Erin said. "He told me to stay in my lane." Chen laughed, sharp and bitter. "Well, your lane just expanded significantly. General Hayes put out a memo this afternoon. All tactical briefings will now include a mandatory weather assessment with full input from the meteorology officer. That is you. Congratulations. You have been promoted from background noise to actually important." Erin wasn't sure how to feel about that. On one hand, it was what she had wanted from the beginning, to be taken seriously, to have her expertise valued. On the other hand, it had taken people almost dying to make it happen, and that felt wrong somehow, like a victory built on a foundation of suffering. She pushed her food around her plate and tried to muster some enthusiasm for her new status. The days that followed were different. Erin attended briefings where people actually looked at her when she spoke, where her weather assessments were incorporated into mission planning from the beginning instead of being tacked on as an afterthought. She was consulted on everything from supply runs to combat operations, her opinion sought on visibility conditions, wind patterns, temperature fluctuations that could affect equipment performance. It was exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure, the feeling of finally being heard after so many months of shouting into the void. But the biggest change came 3 weeks later, when General Hayes called her into his office for a private meeting. She arrived exactly on time, nervous despite the general's improved opinion of her work, and found him sitting behind his desk with a folder open in front of him and an expression that gave away nothing. "Sit down, Officer Cole," he said, gesturing to a chair. She sat. Hayes closed the folder and leaned back, studying her with those sharp eyes that had seen more combat than most people could imagine. I have been reviewing your service record, he continued. Top of your class at Colorado State. Published research on microclimate systems. 2 years with the 3rd Infantry Division in Iraq, where you apparently predicted a haboob that destroyed an enemy staging area and saved an entire company from walking into a minefield they never knew was there. Erin shifted uncomfortably. That was classified, sir. Everything is classified, Hayes said with a slight smile. The point is, you are wasted here, Officer Cole. You are brilliant at what you do, and you should be doing it at a higher level. I am recommending you for a position with JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command. They have been looking for someone with your particular skill set, someone who can provide weather intelligence for high-stakes missions in predictable environments. It would be a promotion, a significant increase in responsibility, and probably the most challenging job you have ever had. Erin blinked, trying to process what he was saying. JSOC. That was the big leagues, the people who did the missions that never made the news, the operations that shaped the course of wars in ways the public would never know. It was also dangerous, high pressure, and exactly the kind of thing she had dreamed about when she first joined the military. Sir, I do not know what to say. Say yes, Hayes replied, or say you need time to think about it, but do not say no. You are too good at this to spend your career stuck in containers on forward operating bases, Cole. You have a gift. Use it where it matters most. She thought about Montana, about watching clouds and predicting rain, about her father losing cattle because he couldn't see a storm coming fast enough. She thought about 4 wounded soldiers and a convoy that would have been slaughtered if she hadn't been watching her screens at exactly the right moment. She thought about all the other soldiers, the ones on missions she would never hear about, who might need someone to tell them what the weather was going to do before it happened. When can I start? She asked. General Hayes smiled, a real smile this time, the first one she had ever seen from him. That is what I thought you would say. You ship out in 2 weeks. In the meantime, train your replacement and try not to predict any more ambushes. My blood pressure cannot take it. Erin left his office feeling like she was floating, like gravity had temporarily released its hold on her, and she might drift away if she wasn't careful. She went back to her weather station, her container full of computers and monitors and the tools of her strange trade, and looked at it with new eyes. This had been her home for 6 months, her sanctuary and her battleground, the place where she had fought to be heard and finally succeeded. Leaving it felt wrong and right at the same time, bittersweet in the way that all important changes are. Lieutenant Chen caught up with her that evening, as the sun was setting over the base and painting the sky in shades of purple and gold that reminded Erin why she loved the atmosphere in the first place. He had heard the news already, because of course he had, and he wore an expression that was equal parts proud and sad. JSOC, he said, shaking his head. They are going to work you to death. You know that, right? Probably, Erin agreed. But at least I will die doing something that matters. You matter here, Chen said quietly. You have changed how this entire base thinks about weather intelligence. That is not nothing. I know, Erin replied, but there are people out there who need what I can do more than you all do now. You have a trained replacement coming. JSOC has no one. If I can help them, I should. Chen nodded, accepting the logic even if he did not like it. Just promise me you will not forget the little people when you are off saving the world with special operators. I promise, Erin said, and meant it. The 2 weeks passed in a blur of training sessions, equipment handovers, and farewell dinners that made Erin feel more valued than she ever had in her life. On her last night at FOB Sentinel, General Hayes hosted a small gathering in the officers' mess, an informal affair with beer that tasted slightly less terrible than usual and food that was almost recognizable as cuisine. He gave a short speech, thanking Erin for her service to the base, and specifically not mentioning the convoy ambush, because that was still classified, but everyone in the room knew what he was talking about anyway. When he finished, the assembled officers raised their glasses in a toast, and Erin felt something catch in her throat that might have been emotion. She left the next morning on a transport plane bound for an undisclosed location where she would begin her JSOC orientation. As the base fell away beneath her, growing smaller and smaller until it was just a cluster of beige buildings in an endless sea of brown desert, Erin pressed her face to the window and watched the clouds. There was a pressure system building to the east. Nothing dangerous, just a regular weather pattern that would probably produce some rain over the mountains by evening. She could see it in the way the clouds stacked themselves, in the subtle color gradations that spoke to temperature and humidity and all the invisible forces that shaped the sky. It was beautiful. It was home. It was what she was born to understand. At JSOC headquarters, which looked nothing like a headquarters and could have been mistaken for a corporate office park, except for the armed guards and the serious-looking people in tactical gear, Erin was introduced to a world that operated on a completely different level from anything she had experienced. These were people who planned missions that could not fail, who operated in the dark spaces between diplomacy and war, who needed intelligence that was perfect, because anything less than perfect could mean disaster. The meteorology team was small, just 8 people responsible for providing weather support to operations all over the world. And they needed her not because she was good at reading computer models, but because she could do what the computers couldn't. Her supervisor was a lieutenant colonel named Patricia Reeves, a 15-year veteran of military meteorology who had forgotten more about atmospheric science than most people ever learned. She was tough, demanding, and absolutely uncompromising in her standards, and Erin liked her immediately. On Erin's first day, Reeves sat her down in a conference room with a cup of coffee and a tablet computer and got straight to the point. You are here because General Hayes says you can predict weather events that conventional forecasting misses, Reeves said. I have read your file. I have seen your research. I am impressed. But being impressed and trusting you with missions that could start wars are 2 different things. So, here is how this works. You will spend the next month learning our systems, our protocols, and our standards. You will shadow every mission brief, every operation, every weather call we make. Then, when I am convinced you know what you are doing, you will start making those calls yourself. Questions? Just one, Erin said. Do you believe that microclimate weather prediction is possible? Reeves smiled, a thin expression that held no humor. Officer Cole, I have been doing this job long enough to know that the atmosphere does not care what we believe. It does what it does, and our job is to understand it well enough to keep people alive. If you can do that better than anyone else, I do not care if you use computer models, crystal balls, or divine intervention. Results are all that matter here. Fair enough, Erin said. The month of training was brutal. Erin absorbed information at a pace that made her head hurt, learning the specific requirements of special operations, weather support, the differences between conventional military meteorology and the highly specialized, hyper-accurate forecasting that operators depended on. She studied case files of missions that had succeeded because the weather was right, and missions that had failed because it wasn't. She learned about microterrain analysis, about how a 1-degree difference in temperature could affect helicopter performance at high altitude, about how wind patterns in urban environments could carry sound in unexpected directions and compromise stealth operations. It was a masterclass in the practical applications of atmospheric science, and Erin loved every exhausting minute of it. At the end of the month, Reeves called her back into the conference room. This time, there were other people present, including a Navy SEAL commander named Briggs, who had the kind of face that suggested he had seen things that would give normal people nightmares, and an Air Force major who specialized in close air support coordination. They all looked at Erin with expressions that ranged from curious to skeptical, and she knew this was her test. Reeves activated the large screen on the wall, bringing up a satellite map of a mountainous region that Erin recognized as somewhere in Central Asia. We have an operation scheduled for 36 hours from now, Reeves said. High-value target, time-sensitive. The weather window looks good. Clear skies, low winds, temperatures within acceptable parameters. Standard forecast gives us a 95% confidence for mission success based on environmental factors. She looked at Erin. I want you to tell me if that forecast is accurate. Erin studied the screen, taking in the topographical features, the elevation markers, the wind direction indicators. Then she pulled up her own laptop, accessing the raw atmospheric data streams she had learned to navigate over the past month, looking for the patterns that the standard models might miss. She worked in silence for 10 minutes while the room waited, nobody speaking, nobody moving. Finally, she looked up. The forecast is accurate for the valley floor, she said, but there is a thermal inversion layer forming at about 4,000 meters elevation. It will not show up on standard models for another 12 hours, but By the time of the operation, it will create significant turbulence on the ridgeline where the extraction is planned. Helicopter performance will be degraded, and there is a risk of wind shear that could make the landing zone dangerous. Reeves and Briggs exchanged glances. The SEAL commander leaned forward. "How confident are you?" 85%, Erin said. "I could be wrong. The inversion might dissipate before it becomes a factor, but the pressure data suggests it will strengthen, not weaken." Briggs nodded slowly, then looked at Reeves. "We can move the extraction point to the lower valley. It adds 15 minutes to the exfil, but if she is right, it is worth it." "Agreed," Reeves said. She turned to Erin. "Good work, Officer Cole. Now do it again for the next mission, and the one after that, and the one after that. Welcome to JS Oak." Over the following months, Erin became an integral part of the team. She provided weather intelligence for operations in a dozen countries. Each one different, each one critical. She learned to work under impossible deadlines, to make calls based on incomplete data, to trust her instincts when the computers failed. She was right far more often than she was wrong, and when she was wrong, she analyzed her mistakes with the same intensity she brought to her successes, constantly refining her understanding of how the atmosphere worked in ways that defied conventional wisdom. The operators learned to trust her. That was the most important thing, more important than her accuracy or her technical skills. Trust was currency in the special operations world, and Erin earned it one mission at a time, one forecast at a time, one successful operation where the weather did exactly what she said it would do. She became known for her micro-forecasts, her ability to predict conditions in specific locations at specific times with a precision that seemed almost supernatural. Soldiers who had never heard of microfront instability or thermal inversion layers learned to listen when she said the weather was going to change, because when Erin Cole said something about the weather, it was gospel. But the job took its toll. Every mission she supported was high stakes. Every forecast she made was critical. And the weight of knowing that people's lives depended on her being right wore on her in ways she hadn't anticipated. She started having dreams about weather patterns, about clouds that turned into soldiers and wind that carried screams. She lost weight, slept poorly, drank too much coffee, and developed a nervous habit of checking pressure readings on her phone every few minutes, even when she wasn't working. Lieutenant Colonel Reeves noticed and pulled her aside one day to have a conversation that Erin had been dreading. "You are burning out," Reeves said bluntly. "I can see it. The team can see it. You need to take leave, Cole. That is not a suggestion." "I am fine," Erin protested. "I am keeping up with the workload." "You are exceeding the workload," Reeves countered. "But that does not mean you are fine. This job destroys people who do not take breaks. I have seen it happen. You are too valuable to lose because you could not step back and breathe for a few weeks." Erin wanted to argue, but she knew Reeves was right. She was exhausted, running on fumes and adrenaline. And sooner or later, she was going to make a mistake that would cost someone their life. So she agreed to take 2 weeks of leave, her first real time off since joining JSOC, and went back to Montana to visit her father. The ranch looked exactly the same as it had when she left for college 10 years ago. Same fences, same barn, same big sky stretching overhead like an invitation to dream. Her father, older now but still strong, greeted her with a hug that lasted a long time and asked no questions about what she had been doing for the past year. He knew better than to pry into military matters. Instead, they spent the days doing ranch work, mending fences and checking cattle and riding horses through the hills. And in the evenings, they sat on the porch and watched the weather roll in across the plains. On the fourth night, after dinner, her father said, "You look tired, Erin, more tired than a person your age should be." "I am tired," Erin admitted. "The job is harder than I expected." "Is it worth it?" he asked. "Whatever you are doing out there." Erin thought about convoy ambushes and thermal inversions and helicopter extractions on mountainside landing zones. She thought about soldiers who came home because she told them the weather was going to change, and they believed her. She thought about the weight of responsibility and the cost of being right and the price of occasionally being wrong. "Yes," she said finally, "it is worth it." Her father nodded, accepting her answer. "Then, make sure you take care of yourself while you are doing it," he said. "Because if you burn yourself out trying to save everyone, you will not save anyone in the end." Those words stayed with her when she returned to JSOC, rested and clear-headed in a way she hadn't been for months. She threw herself back into the work, but with more balance this time, making sure to sleep, to eat properly, to take breaks when she needed them. The missions kept coming, each one important, each one urgent, and Erin kept providing the weather intelligence that made them possible. She became a legend in the tight-knit special operations community, the meteorology officer who could predict the unpredictable, the woman who saw patterns in chaos. 3 years into her JSOC assignment, Erin was working late one night when a priority alert came through. Emergency operation, immediate weather assessment required. She pulled up the briefing materials and felt her stomach drop. It was a rescue mission. A helicopter carrying 8 soldiers had gone down in hostile territory due to mechanical failure, and a quick reaction force was being scrambled to extract them before enemy fighters could reach the crash site. The problem was the weather. A massive storm system was moving through the area, bringing high winds, reduced visibility, and conditions that made helicopter operations extremely dangerous. The mission commander, an Army colonel named Davidson, was in the operations center when Erin arrived. He looked grim. "Cole, we need to know if we can fly. The crash site is 60 miles into enemy territory. If we do not get them out in the next 2 hours, they are dead." Erin pulled up every sensor, every satellite feed, every data stream she had access to. The storm was bad, worse than the initial reports suggested. Wind gusts up to 50 knots, ceiling dropping below 500 feet. Rain that would make instrument flying treacherous at best. By every conventional measure, it was a no-go situation. But Erin could see something else in the data, a narrow window of slightly less terrible conditions that would open up in about 90 minutes and last for maybe 20 minutes before the worst of the storm hit. "There is a window," she said carefully. "Not a good window, but a possible one. 90 minutes from now, the winds will drop to about 35 knots and the ceiling will lift to around 800 feet. It will not last long, maybe 20 minutes. But if your pilots are good enough, they can make it in and out during that time." Davidson looked at the screens, then at Erin. "How confident are you about this window?" 70%, Erin said. "Maybe 75. The storm is chaotic. I could be off on the timing by 10 or 15 minutes in either direction." "That is not a lot of margin for error," Davidson said. "No, sir, it is not," Erin agreed. "But it is the only chance those soldiers have. If you wait for the storm to pass, it will be too late." The colonel made his decision in less than 5 seconds. "Launch the mission. We fly in 90 minutes. He looked at Erin. "You better be right about this, Cole." "Yes, sir," Erin said, and felt the weight of 8 lives settle onto her shoulders like a physical thing. The next 90 minutes were the longest of Erin's life. She monitored the storm in real time, watching the wind speeds, tracking the pressure changes, recalculating her projections every few minutes as new data came in. The window was there. She could see it forming, but it was narrower than she had hoped, and the timing was going to be critical. She stayed on the line with the mission commander, providing constant updates, talking the pilots through what they were going to face. At T-minus 5 minutes, the rescue helicopters lifted off into conditions that no sane pilot would normally fly in. Erin watched them on the tracking screen, 2 black dots crawling across the map toward the crash site, fighting winds that tried to throw them sideways, climbing through clouds that cut visibility to almost nothing. She held her breath and prayed to gods she didn't believe in that she had gotten the forecast right. At T-minus 0, the helicopters reached the crash site just as the window opened. The winds dropped to 32 knots, exactly as Erin had predicted. The ceiling lifted to 820 feet. Visibility improved to almost a mile. The pilots put the helicopters down, loaded the survivors, and lifted off again with 90 seconds to spare before the conditions deteriorated into absolute hell. 17 minutes later, the rescue force was clear of the storm and heading home with all 8 soldiers accounted for, some injured but all alive. In the operations center, people cheered and clapped each other on the back, celebrating a successful mission pulled off against impossible odds. Colonel Davidson found Erin and shook her hand, his grip firm and his expression grateful. "Outstanding work, Cole," he said. "You saved 8 lives tonight." "Just doing my job, sir," Erin replied, but she felt something break loose inside her chest. Something that had been wound tight for 3 years, and she had to turn away before anyone could see the tears in her eyes. That mission became the defining moment of Erin's career. She was promoted to captain, awarded a commendation medal, and offered her choice of assignments. She chose to stay with JSOC because that was where she was needed most, where her strange gift for reading the sky could do the most good. She worked there for another 2 years, supporting operations that would never be declassified, saving lives in ways that would never be publicly acknowledged. Eventually, she was offered a position at the National Weather Service, heading up a new division focused on developing advanced forecasting techniques for extreme weather events. It was a chance to move back into civilian life, to apply what she had learned in the military to helping protect entire communities instead of individual soldiers. It was also a chance to sleep through the night without dreaming about weather patterns that killed people. She took the job. On her last day at JSOC, Lieutenant Colonel Reeves, now a full colonel and commander of the entire meteorology division, hosted a farewell gathering that brought together operators and analysts from across the command. They told stories about missions where Erin's forecasts had made the difference, about the time she predicted a sandstorm that provided perfect cover for an exfiltration, about the time she spotted a fog bank that would have hidden enemy reinforcements, about the countless small moments when her insight had kept people safe. When it was Erin's turn to speak, she stood in front of the assembled crowd and tried to find words adequate to what she was feeling. "Thank you," she said finally, "for trusting me, for listening when I told you the weather was going to do something impossible, for believing that someone who watches clouds for a living could help win wars." She paused, then added with a small smile, "And for not laughing when I told you about microfront instability." The room laughed at that, the kind of warm laughter that comes from shared experience and mutual respect. Then Commander Briggs, the SEAL who had been in her first mission brief 3 years ago, stood up and raised his glass. "To Captain Cole," he said, "the only person I have ever met who can predict when it is going to rain lead. May your skies always be clear, and may you never stop watching them." They drank to that, and Erin felt something she had not felt in a long time. Pride. Not the proud that comes from awards or promotions or recognition, but the deep, quiet pride of knowing that she had done something meaningful with her life, that her strange gift had mattered, that the years of being dismissed and ignored and laughed at had all been worth it in the end. She left JSOC the next morning and drove to her new job in Washington, D.C., where she would spend the next chapter of her life trying to prevent hurricanes and tornadoes from killing civilians the way she had once prevented bullets and bombs from killing soldiers. It was different work, but the fundamental principle was the same. Watch the sky, read the patterns, tell people what was coming before it arrived, save lives. On her desk in her new office, Erin kept a small brass plaque that General Hayes had given her the day she left DeFob Sentinel. It was engraved with the words that had become something of a personal motto, the words she had said in a moment of frustration that had somehow captured the essence of what she did. "Told you it would rain lead, sir." She looked at it every morning when she came to work, and it reminded her of who she was and what she was capable of, and why watching clouds mattered more than most people would ever understand. The atmosphere was chaos, beautiful and terrifying, and completely indifferent to human concerns. But if you paid attention, if you learned its language and respected its power, and trusted your instincts when everyone else said you were wrong, you could sometimes see the future written in the wind. And sometimes, if you were very lucky and very skilled and very stubborn, you could use that knowledge to save lives. That was Erin Cole's story, the meteorology officer who watched the sky and saw things other people missed. The woman who predicted microfront instability and convoy ambushes and narrow windows in impossible storms. The person who learned early on that being right was not always enough, that you had to fight to be heard, that the cost of being ignored was measured in lives lost and opportunities squandered. But she also learned that persistence paid off, that competence eventually won respect, that doing your job with excellence and integrity would ultimately matter more than any amount of skepticism or dismissal. She learned that the world needed people who saw patterns in chaos, who understood systems too complex for simple explanations, who had the courage to speak up when they knew something important, even if no one wanted to listen. Most of all, she learned that watching clouds was not a strange hobby or a useless skill or a waste of talent. It was a calling, a responsibility, a way to serve that was just as important as any soldier carrying a rifle or any general planning a campaign. The atmosphere touched everything, influenced everything, shaped the outcome of battles and missions and lives in ways both obvious and subtle. Understanding it, truly understanding it, was a kind of power. And power, used wisely, could change the world one forecast at a time. Years later, when Erin Cole retired after a long career in meteorology, she went back to Montana and bought a small ranch not far from where she grew up. She spent her days watching clouds roll across the big sky, tracking their movements with the same intensity she once brought to combat forecasts and rescue missions. Sometimes she consulted for the National Weather Service when they had a particularly difficult situation. Sometimes she gave lectures at universities, teaching the next generation of meteorologists about microclimate systems and the importance of trusting your data, even when it contradicts conventional wisdom. But mostly she just watched the sky and remembered the general who laughed at her 17-minute warning, remembered the convoy that almost died because no one believed microfront instability was real, remembered the narrow window in the storm that saved 8 soldiers, remembered all the moments when being right had mattered, when seeing patterns in chaos had saved lives, when watching clouds had been the most important thing in the world. And on quiet evenings, when the weather was just starting to turn, when she could feel the pressure dropping and see the first signs of a system moving in, Erin would pour herself a cup of coffee and sit on her porch and smile. Because she knew something the rest of the world did not. Something written in the wind and clouds and the subtle language of the atmosphere. She knew exactly when it was going to rain, and she had finally earned the right to keep that knowledge to herself.